Hello, Canucks fans, and welcome back to another episode of Canucks Conversation. It's an emergency edition of Canucks Conversation. And man, Harmon, we were talking about doing two shows this week. I was just going to do a show on Saturday. I signed off yesterday's emergency show by saying we will see you on Saturday for the draft show with me and Dave Hall. But the Canucks had other ideas. The Canucks had other ideas because they have signed Dakota Joshua to a 4-year contract extension with a 3.25 annual average value. My name is Dave Quadrelli. Joining me is my regular co-host, Harmon Dial. This is Canucks Conversation, and it is brought to you today by our friends over at Four Winds Brewing. No specific one today, just Four Winds Brewing. Go check them out in Delta. We love working with Four Winds. They love working with us. We've got the Light the Lamp contest during the season. If you're new here, and I'll tell you this throughout the show, because these emergency episodes, Harm, they get a lot of people. Even the ones at 11 a.m. on a Thursday, they get a lot of people watching. So I'll tell you a few times. We host 5 days a week. In the summer, it's 3, but we host 5 days a week during the season. Canucks Conversation here live on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Harm, let's dive into this. Let's dive into this contract for Joshua. 4 years, $3.25 million annual average value. Your thoughts on the deal?
Yeah, so right off the bat, it's probably less than what he could have gotten on the open market, because I don't know how much people have followed the reports outside of Vancouver, but there were a lot of teams outside of Vancouver that their beat writers were already talking about, ooh, Joshua would be a great fit here. We could see whether it's Detroit or Toronto, just as a couple of examples. Any team that basically wanted a little bit of size and edge on their third line was targeting Joshua, especially because he had a decent playoffs, was solid down the stretch, had some momentum to him. And he's also just the type of forward that teams tend to want to give the bag to on free agency. So right off the bat, I mean, there's a chance he could have gotten closer to $4 million. That said, $3.25 million is still a premium to pay for a bottom six player. But because of his unique all-around skill set, I think it's a number that he can live up to, right? Number one, you're banking on the chemistry that he and Garland had this past season and how vital that third line was for the team's success, right? It wasn't just that the Canucks had a solid third line. For large stretches, it was one of the best third lines in the NHL when you looked at their underlying numbers. And again, speaking about Joshua's all-around skill set, number one, it's the heaviness and physicality, right? The Canucks forward group is pretty light, and we'll dive deeper into that aspect of it. It's the secondary scoring. It's the high-end penalty killing ability as well. By the end of the season, his PK minutes had shot up. Not to mention, he developed into a player that Rick Tocchet could trust in a lot of late game situations, whether it was holding a lead, and he's got the heaviness along the boards to win battles and get pucks out, but also in 6-on-5 offensive situations where we can use where the Canucks were able to use him as a net front guy. So I think he's got the all-around skill set to live up to this contract, even though it is, of course, a bit of a premium to be paying a bottom six player.
Yeah, the thing that I was reminded of, Cody Severson tweeted this out, was the last management regime handed out a 3x3 to Jay Beagle. So he's only signing for 0.25 more than Jay Beagle when it comes to the AAV there. So again, I agree with you. I agree with you that maybe it's a bit of a price to pay, but ultimately he could have got more on the free agent market. And that seems to be what most Canucks fans are focusing on. Let's quickly hit the YouTube live chat here. We see this from Ryan. He said, the fact that Bluger and Dak both didn't want to explore free agency shows how much players love playing in Vancouver. It's a great signing. Dak is critical for Garland to be able to play the way he does. Let's focus on that aspect because you brought it up, Harm. The chemistry between Dakota Joshua and Connor Garland. Ultimately, do you think this, and we already saw Connor Garland post about it on his Instagram story. Do you think this signing matters for Connor Garland maybe more than anybody? Like, what does Connor Garland look like next year if he doesn't have Dakota Joshua riding shotgun with him?
Well, we kind of saw it down the stretch when Joshua hurt his hand, right? And Garland wasn't really as dynamic, as effective driving play as we were used to. He still had nights where he played decently, but that third line didn't start clicking and sustainably having heavy shifts in the offensive zone and doing what they were executing in the first half of the season until Joshua came back from injury. So absolutely you're banking on that. And I think it'll help Garland in part because I've spoken to Garland about this. And he referenced that Joshua's one of he didn't say he's one of the few players, but what he said Joshua is really good at that works well with him is reading off of each other on the forecheck, right? They just seem to know if one guy's going in as the F1, that this is the exact slot where F2 should be. Even with the puck, just always knowing where to support it. They seem to think the game at the same wavelength. They have a bit of a unique chemistry there. Plus, when Garland is doing his spins down low in the offensive zone, he's spinning off checks. He's trying to find space. Joshua knows how to get open in the slot. He knows how to get open in and around the net, and Garland can feed him in those passing lanes. Whereas when Joshua was gone, and it was Ilya Mikheyev, it was other options on that third line, the forwards who were around the net weren't able to get open in the right spots. It felt like Garland would have a window of opportunity where it's like, okay, he's just slipped off a check, and he's got a window of like 2-3 seconds, but to make a pass before the slot passing lane is going to close off. But the forward isn't there, whereas Joshua is usually there and knows how to read off Garland.
Yeah, absolutely. Those two are super dynamic together. And again, we've seen them play with multiple centers, both of which are going to be signed for next season, obviously with Bluger coming down yesterday. And if you're just joining us, you can go listen to our emergency episode yesterday where Jeff Patterson and I broke down the Ilya Mikheyev trade. And we saw the report from Friedman shortly after that trade that the Canucks would be trying to re-engage with Dakota Joshua. It ended up not taking very long. And our take on this, Harm, it really just comes down to he could have gotten more on the open market. He chose to take a little bit less to stay in Vancouver. Josh was unavailable today. He's not able to speak with media today, but I wonder how much of this just came down to comfort, right? About how much of it is just like, okay, Vancouver was the first team to give this guy a one-way contract, right? He's a certified late bloomer. He really found another gear. Like, he was good in his first year in Vancouver, but he really found another gear under Rick Tocchet. He's quite clearly a Rick Tocchet player. And I just wonder how much of this came down to comfort level. You would imagine it'd be a pretty big portion of it.
Yeah, especially he's really close with Garland off the ice as well. So to know that, okay, I've got a close friend of mine that not only do I get to continue spending time with him, but I also know that I'm going to get to play on his line, and that we're not just a typical third line. We're the type of line that come playoff time, for example, and part of it is because they had Elias Lindholm, which helped Rick Tocchet have extra trust in that line. But they were going up against the Leon Draisaitl line in the second round of the playoffs. That's a level of trust that most third lines don't get. And in reality, deployment wise, that Lindholm, Joshua, Garland line in the playoffs was really more of a second line. When you look at their ice time, when you look at their matchups, it was more Pettersson's line that was getting third line deployment. And so you get the trust factor, you get a massive role. He's going to get to kill penalties. He's likely, I'd assume, going to this coming year get more power play time. At 5-on-5, you love your role. You're in a beautiful city. You're still making a decent chunk of change. It's not like he took this massive discount. And you're on a team that has a chance to win. I think that checks a lot of boxes for what free agents look for.
Okay, Harm, let's look at the Canucks cap picture after they have signed this deal. How much do they have left in cap space? Because obviously we know they created some yesterday with the Mikheyev trade. By my calculation, they basically have $750,000 more than they did yesterday at this point now with this contract, right?
I've got them at around 18.5 million in cap space left. Now, if you're looking at cap friendly, they have Tolapilo's contract up on the NHL roster, which of course I don't expect Tolopilo to actually be on there. So I've subtracted that off the books, and so that's still a large chunk of cash to go out and find a running mate for Elias Pettersson is still the top need. Outside of that, two number 4-5 defensemen. Could those be Nikita Zadorov and Tyler Myers? Potentially. You still likely need a number 6-7 D-man to replace Cole and give you competition for Noah Juleson and Mark Friedman for those sort of depth defense roles. And then re-signing Artur Shilovs. That's still, you still got a lot of capital to play with. And now, do you necessarily have enough to go after Gensel, re-sign Zadorov if he's looking for $5 million plus, bring back Myers and do all of that? That might be a little bit tight, but They've got enough to where they can identify a primary target and know that we've got the cap space to chase this player, acquire an expensive contract, and still have enough money to reasonably fill out the depth parts of our roster and the blue line.
Yeah, so a lot of people asking, ultimately, what does this mean for Gensel? What does this mean for Big Z? People asking all these questions, and ultimately, the Canucks are going to have flexibility to choose what they want to do. Like you just said, they still have that money if they want to go out and get Jake Gensel. They still have some spots to round out as well, but it'll be interesting to see what everybody else comes in at, Harm, because we've heard that Zadorov is willing to take less than he would get on the open market to stay in Vancouver. And again, I've kind of little bit poked holes in the idea of that, of like, okay, well, what does Zadorov think he can get on the open market compared to what the Canucks think he could get on the open market? But we've now seen 2 contracts here, Harm, where players in Bluger and Joshua certainly took less than they could have gotten on the open market. So I just wonder what that means for a guy like Zadorov and how much lower it'll be for Zadorov. I asked this to Jeff yesterday, and I answered it yesterday as well. When it came to Dakota Joshua, I asked what was the right price for them to sign. And I threw out a 3x3. 4 times 3.25 is a little bit higher than I threw out there, but again, it's fine. It's a fine contract. It's nothing, you're not losing sleep over that extra year and that extra 2.5 million on the cap. So I'll ask you about Nikita Zadorov. Now that you have this cap picture, we know about Mikheyev going to Chicago. We know Philip Hronek's here. We know Teddy Bluger's number. Now we know Dakota Joshua's number. You're heading into free agency. You have a few days left to sign Nikita Zadorov, Harm. You are Patrick Allvin. What is the right price to bring back Nikita Zadorov?
Yeah, for me, it's the AAV that I would really want to be conservative with. It has to be below 5, right, to me, because ultimately Zadorov, as much as I love how physical he is, he skates well, he defends well, he ultimately is still a number 4 or 5 defenseman over the course of his career. So unless you're expecting him to break out at the age of 28 or 29 years old, he is what he is right now. So that has to be under 5 million for me. That's a non-negotiable on my end. Now, if you go a flat, let's say 5 million times, there's 5 or 6 years, I think you're overpaying at that point. Now, do you feel that that's a player that you are comfortable paying a little bit extra for? I mean, maybe the Canucks front office feels like he's too unique of a player to lose, but for me, the cap hit would have to be below 5.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think recently when we've talked about it before these signings, I was kind of throwing out, okay, 5.5 is just too much. It's too much for my liking, but ultimately I think he could probably get that, if not 6, on the open market. Like if a team really wanted to Nikita Zadorov, I have no doubt that someone would go to 6 million. I think it's a lot, but I think someone would do it with the recency bias of his playoff run and everything. And hey, like that's a big reason that Canucks fans really want this guy re-signed, is what he did in the playoffs. Everybody saw it. So Kurt Richardson asking us in the chat, would you do 6 years for Zadorov at 4.5? I think if you can add a year to bring down that AAV, like if you could do 6x4, that I would run to do that. But I think about 6x4.5, I think.
Yeah, especially a number of people, including Frank, have already brought this up, but some of these bigger guys that skate well do tend to age well, right? When you look at how Myers through his 30s has actually aged pretty well. So for the Canucks, especially now that they're in this window where the next few years are your best shot to win a Stanley Cup, I'm okay giving a player an extra year to bring the cap hit down.
Yeah, absolutely. Over 500 people watching us right now on YouTube. We had thousands last night. We had like 3.5 thousand on Twitter last night, and I didn't even check it. So I'm going to give the Twitter chat some love as well. We appreciate all of you who are watching us, no matter where you're watching from. We appreciate all of you. Like I said earlier, my name is Dave Virgilli. That is Harmon Dial. We host Canucks Conversation, and it's not just emergency episodes. You can find us 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday during the off season, and 5 days a week during the season, right here on the Canucks Army YouTube channel or the social channel, wherever you're watching us from. Be sure to check out CanucksArmy.com. And of course, Harmon's site, The Athletic Vancouver. Okay, Harm, let's keep digging into the YouTube chat here. People really want to see them go after Zadorov. I think if you have to sign Gensel and you want, like, I bring up Brendan Dillon again, is basically where I'm going with this. Is we talked about him yesterday as well when we were talking about Mikheyev, is if Zadorov's not going to be able to take a discount that you like as a team, I think you're fine going with Brendan Dillon as your plan B.
Yeah, and I want to go through the math just to sort of illustrate and really walk through, like, can the Canucks go after both Gensel and Zadorov, because it's pretty close, and I guess it depends on how creative the Canucks can sort of get here. First, I just want to double check my $18.5 million cap figure. Just give me a
Take
second.
As you do that,
in the meantime, if you want to read through the YouTube.
well, yeah, as you do that, I also wanted to bring this up, and I'm not going to ask you for your reaction on it, Harm, so do your thing, but we're seeing some reports come out from Rick Dollywall, first had it on Donnie and Dolly, and then Patrick Johnson of the Province also confirmed it on Twitter, that the Canucks are now considering bringing Casey DeSmith back. This was not going to be the case, no pun intended, about a week or two ago, but we've heard stuff about Archer Shelov's offer sheet and all that. You can read about that over at Canucks Army. We kind of talked about it on yesterday's show with Frank Saravelli as well. So 3 shows in the past 24 hours, I just realized. We just did 3 shows. Well, you missed last night, which was fine, but 3 shows in the past 24 hours. Look at us go. Lots of content here for Canucks fans, but the Canucks reportedly interested in bringing back Casey DeSmith. Of course, he is going to be a free agent when free agency opens on Monday. We will see how this all shakes down. We're going to be hosting a big free agency show as well. Jacob Lazare. Oh, Jacob Lazar. I always say his name wrong. Jacob Lazar, our producer today. He's also going to be joining me on that show on July 1. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And hey, hopefully you can make a stop by as well, Harm.
Yeah, so I double checked. 18.5 is correct. So let's walk through this, right? Let's say Gensel costs 9.5 and the Canucks are fortunate enough to win the sweepstakes, right? So let's slot him in at, let's say it costs $9.5 million. Now, let's say they want to bring back Myers at a sort of discount. Let's say it's 2.75, right? We're just throwing hypotheticals out there. These aren't predictions. And then after, let's say you want an extra depth defender to replace Cole. Let's say that costs you maybe like $1 million. Let's say Shelov's cost you like $900,000 on a cheap extension. You would then have $4.35 million left over to potentially go after Zadorov. Now, you could go a little bit cheaper on that depth guy, but be closer to the league minimum. And so you could get up to around $4.5 million in cap space left over for Zadorov. So it's tight, but you can at 4.5 maybe make it work. If the ask is closer to 5, then I'm not sure the Canucks have the money if they plan on signing Gensel for somewhere around $9.5 million.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
this is hilarious.
Again, like, what are your odds of getting Gensel? Right? I don't know. And if you strike out on him, then all of a sudden, I'm assuming whoever their plan B is, whether it's in free agency or the trade market, that player's cap hit isn't going to be 9.5, and so that probably then boosts your likelihood of wanting to re-sign Zadorov.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so interested how it's all going to shake down on July 1, Harm. They have the flexibility. We'll see how it's going to go. Again, if you're just joining us, emergency episode, because the Canucks have re-signed Dakota Joshua to a 4-year deal at $3.25 million per year.
On Joshua, one of the other things that I really wanted to highlight that I'm sure Rick Tocchet was thinking about, was lobbying for, and wanting Joshua back, is just look at this Canucks roster from this past year, and as we project it moving forward to this coming year, before the Joshua signing, how many players or how many forwards that they had who were at least 6 feet and 200 pounds, right? It's a thin list. I'm going through it right now.
You're speaking my language, Harm. You're speaking my language.
Literally only JT Miller that I see, and Brock Besser, because I'm assuming that Elias Lindholm is going to walk, right? And outside of that, even the taller guys that they have, whether it's Nils Oman, whether it's Teddy Bluger, who's at a flat 6 feet, Phil DiGiuseppe at a flat 6 feet, Linus Karlsson at 6'1", they're not Elias Pettersson at 6'2", they're not 200 pounds. Like, even Podkolzin isn't listed at 200 pounds. So they didn't have a lot of size and heaviness up front. And when you think about wanting to have success in the playoffs, yeah, you don't want to overpay for size necessarily, but this forward group without Joshua felt quite light and small, and we know how important it is for the Canucks to win battles along the walls, to be a team that can even look at their offensive strategy. So much of their offensive strategy this past season was, let's recover pucks on the cycle, go low to high, point shots, and then we've got to win battles around the front of the net offensively to get tips, to get deflections, to get rebounds. It requires a lot of will. It requires hard work, but it also requires toughness and an element of size to actually beat the other team's defenders around the net.
Speaking my language, Harm, I don't think we need Riley Tough anymore in this market. I'll throw that out there. Brett Murray, Riley Tough, not friends with them anymore. And as Karan said in the chat, it turns out the next Dakota Joshua is just Dakota Joshua, because the Canucks have, of course, re-signed Dakota Joshua. I'll throw this one to you. This one from Karan as well. Would you rather Gensel at $10 million, Harmon? Don't forget, the other day we were talking about how that's kind of the walkaway price, or Zadorov at $5 million? His answer is Gensel. What's your answer to that question?
So
I can't say I'm walking from both and signing Toffoli and Dillon, even though that might be what you do if those are the numbers.
I'd lean towards Gensel, even though 10's too much for him. I would still lean towards that, because an elite goal scorer is so much harder to find than a number 4 or 5 defenseman. Yeah, I can go bargain shopping, and yeah, is the cheaper 4 or 5 option going to fully replace everything Zadorov brings to the table? No, but I can at least get away with it, as opposed to I can't go bargain shopping on a star level forward and expect that he's going to be able to do what Gensel can.
Just think about what it costs for them to go get Zadorov on the trade market during the season, and what it cost Carolina to go get Gensel on the trade market. That's all you really need to think about, I think, when you answer this question. So I also go Gensel when it comes to that. Okay, we've got over 500 people on YouTube again. We really appreciate it, folks. Make sure you like the video. Make sure you subscribe to the Canucks Army channel. Harm, we'll close it out there, I think, unless there's any breaking news coming. I don't think there is. So is there anything else you wanted to say about this contract before we close out here?
Yeah, the other thing that I'd mention is, of course, there's some risk, just in the sense that Joshua shot 20% this past year. But 2 notes on that. Number one, he had 18 goals in 63 games, which is a 23 goal pace prorated over 82 games. The Canucks don't need Joshua to score 23 goals next year, right? It'd be lovely if he does. It'd be a bonus if he does. But even if he's in the mid to high teens, that's good enough, given that he's a high-end penalty killer, that at 5-on-5, he's a trustworthy defensive option. The physicality aspect, the play driving, the play driving, and what he does to elevate Garland as well. So you can live with a modest step back, just because you don't need him knocking on the door of 25 goals. And second, I think he has the skill set to produce more on the power play next season as a net front presence. This past year, he only had 23 minutes on the power play, only had 1 point, which was that between the legs goal against Anaheim down the stretch after he came back from injury. He could take a modest step back at 5-on-5 offensively and make back some of those numbers on the power play if he's given more of a consistent opportunity, which I think he deserves on the man advantage.
I absolutely agree with you. I asked Rick talking about it a couple times. So he didn't like the questions, but I did ask him about it a couple of times this past season when we were down there at Rogers Arena. Yeah, a lot of people. Ultimately, we had a quick poll question in here. 80% of people say they love the contract. 15% say meh. 3% say that the Canucks should have moved on here. We're going to move on here. We're going to close out this emergency edition of Canucks Conversation. Look at that. It's 11:29 a.m. when we're closing this out, which means Sekeres and Price, our pals over there at Sekeres and Price, find them on Twitter, Facebook, all over the place. YouTube, you can go find their live stream on YouTube. Type in Sekeres and Price in your search bar. They are going live in a matter of moments, and I'm assuming Jeff Patterson and Irfan Ghaffar as well will be going live with an episode of Rink Wide Vancouver at some point here. Maybe it'll be next week. There's going to be a lot to break down. So lots of different products here at Canucks Army. Sekeres and Price, Rink Wide Vancouver, certainly among them. Check out Sekeres and Price starting in a matter of moments. But we'll close it out there for my co-host, Harmon Dial. My name is Dick Quadrelli. Thank you so much for listening to this emergency edition of Canucks Conversation. And hopefully we just see you on Saturday and don't have anything else to do for another emergency episode.
Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.